Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Topic of discussion today is risk mitigation, prevention, and cutting the kill chain, how to minimize the impact of ransomware. I'm privileged to be speaking today with Richard Meeus. He's Director of Security Technology and Strategy at Meeus with Akamai. Richard, thanks so much for taking time to speak with me.
Thanks very much indeed for inviting me on, Tom. Looking forward to it.
So, as we sit here at the end of 2025, what would you say the impact of ransomware is on organizations?
Yeah, it's been a pretty rocky road 2025 when we look at ransomware, especially over here in the UK. And I think it sort of speaks to resilience or a lack of it generally. We saw a lot of attacks over here that impacted retailing, that impacted manufacturing. And organizations were forced to really sort of roll back their capabilities. So much so that the National Cybersecurity Center, which is sort of the shiny happy face of GCHQ, was very vocal in saying that organizations need to be very preventative and looking forward to what could happen if they were a victim of a cyber attack. And even going so far as to say, you need to figure out if you can work on pen and paper, because this could be the extent to what you get. So I think that was one of the main sort of things that we got out of the ransomware attacks in 25. I mean, we've seen more attacks in previous years. Historically, I think we've probably seen less payouts overall. But that could be like a shift to organizations are becoming pressurized by governments and pressurized by regulators to not pay. But that doesn't mean less disruption. The disruption is still there, and it's just taking longer to get back to normal.
So, what would you say the ransomware outlook is as we look ahead into 2026? More of the same?
Yeah, I know that's not what anybody wants to hear, really, but realistically, I don't think there's any indication that it's going to stop or drop or go down. Um, I think we're going to see an evolution of ransomware. I think, maybe it's not going to be sort of the typical organizations that we see. I think there's a potential for supply chain risk to be a greater issue. Organizations or industries that have sort of a few key suppliers, like high-end lithography machines for making semiconductors, those sort of things where you only have one or two key suppliers. If that's impacted, then that's going to affect the whole organization. So I think there's going to be a lot more sort of supply chain infrastructure attacks where you can have basically more impact. Um, I think also less encryption and more stealing. I think the yes, encryption makes a big bang and can have fairly sort of dramatic effects. But once you've done the encryption, the cat is out of the bag. You've got them. They know you're there. You can't hide anymore. Um, and that really means sort of the end of the process. You're then in a negotiation to recover to either extort the ransom, and you can do that through various different ways, or what else are you going to do next? You're just going to leave it. So, with when you steal the data, you're in a far more powerful position because, first of all, can you trust the attacker to delete the data? Can you trust the attacker not to come back at you again? So I think there's going to be people perceiving more value in the data that they're stealing rather than on the value in the encryption. And I think one of the things we're going to see, we saw a bit of this in 2025, is the democratization of a lot of attacks. So what we tend to see now is that AI is beginning to allow more attackers to do what many organizations couldn't do. So the less skilled, you don't need to have years of experience in doing reconnaissance. You don't need to have years of experience understanding how to code encryption tooling or whatever. AI can basically put all of that together for you. So this democratization is going to allow more organizations to spin up. And a good example of an AI-enabled threat group is like FunkSec. FunkSec are a group that are doing AI-enabled attacks. They code written by AI. They have an AI chatbot to do their ransomware negotiations. So I think it's just going to make it a lot easier for a lot more organizations, and I think that's going to be a challenge that's going to basically increase the number of attacks that we see.
Richard, if you were to boil it down, what would you say are the hallmark qualities of today's successful ransomware attacks?
I think it's sort of following on from what we said before in more stealing and less encryption. We did see a very big attacks which were literally around, getting taking out large elements of the network. But I think stealing data, low noise, being quiet, is becoming a lot more of a signature. And we're seeing, so what we're seeing now is that we know there's basically four types of ransomware. You've got encryption, you've got exfiltration, you've also got DDoS, and then like notification. And the notification is of downstream customers and upstream suppliers. And we're seeing a lot of groups now beginning to sort of target the customer, sort of saying, "Do you realize that this company has your supply has been compromised? We've got the data. We know all about you. You need to put pressure on that company to pay the ransom." And similarly from the top down as well. So we're seeing a lot more impact around that as well. And I think we're sort of seeing an increased focus around social engineering. Scattered Spider was a very prominent group this year, and they were very successful with social engineering, going after the internal customer service desk or the external customer service desks. And I think this makes it interesting. I think we should make us aware of any exposed AI chatbots that we're deploying in the future, because AI chatbots are often deployed alongside humans in terms of that customer service function that organizations have. And guess what? They can be socially engineered as well. So you need to sort of think about them as the sort of same level of risk as a human sitting alongside them.
Would you suggest that enterprises begin just to cut off the ransomware kill chain? You got to start somewhere.
So we've been using kill chains in cybersecurity for a number of years now, and it's a really good way of being able to sort of visualize the steps that an attacker needs to take to actually get to their goal of encryption or exfiltration. And commonly, it's sort of done as a number of steps, such as reconnaissance, initial compromise, persistence, information gathering, privilege escalation, lateral movement, staging, and then impact, which would be the encryption or the exfiltration. Now, ideally, obviously we want to stop it right at the very beginning. Maybe not reconnaissance, but at least the initial access, stop them getting in the first place. And commonly this is done by literally basic hygiene, patching. Your VPN gateways, for example. We've seen a whole host of VPNs with severe vulnerabilities this last year, and getting those patches up, because VPNs now are seen as the linchpin of most organizations. Everybody is remote, to some degree or whatever. So therefore, those VPN gateways have become key aspects of our business, linchpins of our business, and therefore there's a lot of focus on the attackers trying to find vulnerabilities in them. And this is why we're seeing them so frequently crop up now. So patching the VPN gateways, using MFA wherever possible, and ideally using things like ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, to be able to reduce that risk of people getting in through VPNs. I mean, in 2025, lots of intrusions were still happening against known vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. So again, basic hygiene will help with a lot. But fundamentally, they are going to get in. No matter how tight we put the edge and controls in place, there's always going to be a way in. And when you look at that kill chain, the reconnaissance, compromise, persistence, information gathering, etc., all the way up to lateral movement, everything before lateral movement is bad because they're in, but it's not critical yet, because it's maybe one or two machines. That's maybe all it is. When it hits lateral movement and goes on to the sort of staging and impact, then we're into critical, because now we've basically got our network compromised and we're in a sort of a career-defining moment, as you were. Keep it to the left before the lateral movement. It's trivial. It's a couple of machines. We can wipe those machines and we can restart it. So the lateral movement becomes the inflection point from a trivial event to a critical event. So trying to stop it at that point becomes key. And the tools that we can do to put in there are things like, well, let's look at what the attackers are using. The attackers tend to rely on things like living off the land techniques and tooling. Most organizations have RDP, remote desktop protocol or secure shell, SSH running on loads of machines. The attackers love this. They can leverage that technology and bounce around the machines as much as they will, escalating privileges until they can get around to the Active Directory server or something like that. So what we want to be able to do is think about how can we reduce that opportunity to do that lateral movement. And then what they also need to do is think about what's going to happen with the exfiltration when if the attackers go in. How can you protect your crown jewels?
Richard, what can organizations do to improve detection and response?
I think fundamentally visibility is what it comes down to. And visibility is something we've been talking about for a while in the security industry. And we need better glasses essentially because we're not able to see a huge amount of our network. We need to understand our assets. We need to understand our data flows. We need to understand what is normal and get a clear view of that. And the problem is you can't ask your app owners what are the dependencies of a particular application because generally the documentation's outdated or the guy who built it left 5 years ago. So understanding from the app owners what is actually happening, what communication flows you have becomes very problematic. So what we need to do is we need to be looking at what are the current data flows we have in our network. Try and build a network plan, a network pattern of what is normality. And then we can start looking at a sort of abnormal analysis. Where can things that don't look normal? If that happens, how am I alerted? Then can I get triage on that? Can I get context on that? And obviously things like AI can help a lot here in giving you that context. But the response doesn't need to be ripping out the cables in your network cabinet, which has happened in the past and it did happen in the UK recently as well. You need something that's going to be a bit more elegant, a bit more precise. And this is where you need to be working on your documentation, your run books, your plans on what to do. And if you detect an abnormality that indicates that somebody's got into your network, what are you going to do? And what do your plans state? And so, how can you segment your network? How can you quarantine the impacted machines? How can you figure out exactly who to call from your incident response teams or your exec teams and whatever? That all needs to be tight and understood, and the plan has to be adhered to. But fundamentally, what you need to do, get your visibility in place and know how you can do your quarantining and isolation.
Okay, if infected, how should they then approach disinfection and, of course, recovery?
So, if an organization is infected, somebody's got in, the bad guys got in there, and you've detected the anomaly. Um, the first thing to do is contain and assess. You need to basically make sure that they cannot spread. It's about getting that lateral movement, stopping that happening so you can keep it as a trivial event across a couple of machines. And that means you've got to quarantine those affected systems immediately. That means no traffic in or out of those machines. Disable any compromised accounts, and if you have any logs, preserve them for forensics. But then you want to think about ring fencing your core assets, your crown jewels. Okay, let's really sort of lock down those and make sure nothing can get in there. And then we need to think about um, patching or eradicating that initial access that we saw. If it was a VPN gateway that needed patching, then let's figure out let's get that done as soon as possible. If it was compromised credentials, let's make sure the credentials are deactivated. And then we need to rebuild from clean gold images. This is where, having offline images that you literally have to bring out from a CD or something like that, something can't be impacted because it's not attached to the network. Similarly with like offline backups that are clean. And once you've got that in, you can then start bringing in the rest of your network. Once you start bringing in your initial machines that are rebuilt from the gold images, and then you can monitor what is happening on those machines, monitoring for any remote access or any attempts that you spotted from the anomaly, from the initial anomaly on your quarantined machines.
All right, given everything you've shared, how are you helping customers address these challenges with Akamai Guardicore segmentation?
So let's go back to the kill chain. So we talked about that inflection point, that lateral movement, and this is where Guardicore segmentation is a real help. First of all, it gives you the visibility to understand your entire network. But the next is that it gives you the ability to block the living off the land tools and techniques that we commonly see within organizations. So we talked about RDP, we talked about SSH. We can block those across your network with one key press. So just say block SSH, we're only going to use it where we need to. Block RDP, we're only going to use it where we need to. By reducing the opportunity for the attacker to compromise a machine and then use something like RDP or SSH or SMB to go onto other machines, taking that opportunity away from them is a massive block to their lateral movement. It really reduces what we call the blast impact of that particular infection. And it also allows us, when we're putting in these controls, it allows us to really control who has access into certain critical applications and access into backups. We can put in like ring fencing around our critical applications, ensuring that only authenticated, authorized connections can get in. So the micro segmentation that we get with Guardicore allows us to isolate the infected machines. It allows us to prevent them from getting out of there and affecting the rest of the network. But it also allows us to lock down our backups and critical apps with authentication and authorization. In terms of detection and response, we got a number of different tools that we can use to detect the anomalies, that we need to be alerted to so we can start understanding which machine is being compromised. So we have things like honeypots that we run inside the network that we know are going to be attractive to the hackers and to the attackers. And if they sort of hit one of the honeypots, that immediately is going to alert us and allows us to understand where that request came from so we can isolate and quarantine that machine. We can detect like network scans or what the attackers want to do. They want to scan the network looking for open ports where they may be able to go in and try and find out what is running on that particular IP address, whether it's a vulnerable application or something like that. We can detect the network scan as well. And therefore, again, isolate and identify the machine that's doing that. And then, as we said before, we can build an entire map of your network, all your assets, all your data flows. And now we can start looking at anything that's out of policy, anything that looks anomalous, that can be alerted and say, okay, we're seeing new types of traffic on this particular data flow that we've never seen before. This is something that you want to look into. So that really sort of gives you that sort of ability to lock down and control what happens on the network in terms of protecting your backups, protecting your critical apps, making sure the user can't break out and do lateral movement. It allows you to detect it through network scans. If we can detect the network scans, we can use deception for honeypot, and we can use the out of policy detection. And then for this disinfection and recovery, which is probably the last part of that, is like, all right, you've been compromised. They've got in and they've impacted a part of your network. So what we think is we can sort of start segmenting, or not sort of think of your network now as in three specific states. You've got your isolated machines, the machines that have been impacted. we isolate these machines. We then have the machines that we think are okay, so we can monitor those machines. And then we have our known clean machines that we built from our gold image. And then we want to have the policies on that. So we want to keep the machines that we know are infected isolated. We want to monitor the rest and clean them. And by developing this out, we can then start moving all of those machines in the monitored state into the clean state, and then clean and delete the isolated machines. So this allows us to basically go from a situation where we didn't have microsegmentation in the past, we can put it in post-attack and do that whole cleanup routine by putting the microsegmentation in place as we go. So this can be used in all sorts of scenarios, be it pre-attack, sort of in peacetime, during the attack, or post-attack. Ideally, pre-attack is best because that's when it gives you the visibility and it gives you the control.
Richard, terrific information. Where can our listeners go now to learn more about how to minimize the impact of ransomware?
So one of the things you can do is go for our white paper, Risk Mitigation, Prevention, and Cutting the Kill Chain, which is available at akamai.com, alongside a whole host of other blogs, tools, and information around ransomware and how you can reduce that impact.
Excellent. Richard, grateful for your time, for your insight today. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. To our attendees, thank you very much for listening. Again, the topics have been risk mitigation, prevention, and cutting the kill chain, how to minimize the impact of ransomware. You have just heard from Richard Meeus, his Director of Security Technology and Strategy at EMEA with Akamai. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention today.